now. Okay, so welcome to our class. And what I'd like to do is share my screen with you, and we will go right into my presentation. And I am going to move some things around here. And so if I could get an audio confirmation. Apologies for that. Let me get the right set of slides. I'm going to share my screen. And let me know if you can see a set of PowerPoint slides.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, thank you, Michelle.
Okay, so again, I'm going to talk about what is GIS. What do we mean by Geographic Information Systems? And we're going to talk about the power of mapping and then the science of where. So just take a moment and think about, what do you think GIS is? Think about that. And what I'd like you to do is turn to your neighbor and just give a one-sentence summary of what do you think GIS is. Go ahead and share that with your neighbor. Okay, great. So I heard a lot of chatter, and I heard some really great words that are near and dear to my heart. I heard mapping. Okay. I heard mapping. I heard data. I heard many different things, and geographic information systems include all of those and more. Analysis, and there are reports, there's story maps, there's dashboards. There is tracking of public health data. With the coronavirus, this has been all over the news, and almost everything that we do in our daily lives is really organized and possible because of mapping. And so if something has a location, which everything that happens somewhere, right? You can put it on a map. We can study history, we can study archaeology, we can study sociology and humans, certainly wildlife ecology, all of the natural sciences, weather phenomenons, and physical sciences as well are possible. We rely on a police force and a fire response team that knows how to use maps and leverage the power of them. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm here with you today, a little bit about my background. So I am a geographic information systems professional. It's similar to getting maybe an accountant CPA certification or a nursing licensure. So it's not a degree, but it is a certification that I have a certain amount of experience and contributions to the field. So it's not just education, it's what have you done for the field of GIS. And my most exciting contribution to GIS was when I worked in Africa, and I made the maps that you see here of elephant ranges in Zambia, and then I looked at this red outline, which might be a little bit difficult to discern, but that is the border of the South Luangwa National Park, and I was working with a conservation organization there and helping them to work on their anti-poaching efforts. And so we made a database of where the poachers were being caught, and we looked at where the poachers would most likely be found, and that was usually related to the habitat, which is called Mopani. And on my mapping excursions and adventures, there were many, many other animals besides elephants that I got to experience and see. And I was there for a month, and that was a really great contribution. I've also worked with a lot of what I call charismatic ocean megavertebrates. So the larger vertebrates, the whales, the dolphins, and the sea turtles. And so this was a really great season that I had. In the upper right-hand corner, I worked as a guide in the calving lagoons of Mexico, and it was a place called San Ignacio. It's a wonderful World Heritage Preserve where the desert meets the ocean, and it's magical. And the whales do get very close to the boat. You can touch them, pet them, all on their terms, of course. Here's a habitat map I made in graduate school, and then I also worked with a lot of seafloor topology, which is also known as bathymetry, and I looked at how we can use visualization tools in education. So that's my background in a nutshell. It's kind of hard to cover 30 years really quickly, but those are the highlights for me. Okay, so now when we talk about GIS, those three letters do stand for Geographic Information Systems. If you look at this information that's presented in front of you, you can see that what we're doing is we're taking a very complex, dynamic, complicated world, and we're saying we want to look at attributes. Attributes are data, and they're characteristics of something. And so for this particular project, it was emission sources, natural resources, where are wells located, in situ stress, storage sites, a geological map of the actual bedrock, and then a digital elevation model, or DEM, which is showing elevation away from the seafloor. I want you to think about GIS layers as being transparencies, and you may not know what a transparency is. Most of you have probably not seen that in the classroom, but it's a clear plastic sheet with information on it. Instructors used to use that before PowerPoint, before computers were ubiquitous. So you're layering that information. By doing that, what you're able to do is see, how does the data compare? Are there correlations? Are there patterns? Are there hotspots? Is there a message in the data that we wouldn't necessarily get if we just looked at one of the data sets? But if we take, for instance, where are the natural resources and where is the in situ stress, we could look at these two different data sets and say, well, maybe there is a connection between the type of natural resource and the in situ stress. As well, maybe there is a connection between our emission sources and our storage sites. Are we getting emissions from these places that we're storing whatever kinds of chemicals we are putting into these storage sites? Okay, so this was a project that was done in and around the area of Beijing, China. I did work for the Heilongjiang University in China, and I taught for their GIS program for 2 years. And this is an example of how you can compare multivariate data sets. So if you just look at that pattern right there, without any information about this project, you would be able to come to some conclusions. So I'll give you just a moment. Certainly, you would be able to see that there are colors, and that those colors are probably giving us a message and telling us something. If we indeed then look at our legend, we can see that we're comparing natural suitability in yellows and greens with socioeconomic suitability in yellows and reds. And the overall message of this map is that the darker and more intense colors mean that it's higher scoring on a natural suitability scale, excuse me, and also a socioeconomic suitability scale. So if we wanted something that was going to be an ideal, let's say, location according to socioeconomic variables and natural variables, we would want to pick an area that's represented in these darker shades. And then we would want to avoid or stay away from areas in the lighter shades. And when you do a suitability analysis, you're going to be able to use the same kinds of technology in order to get that information. So here is an example of a GIS model. And this particular one is looking at bobcat habitat. And I know that that's not business. However, a model follows processes and steps that are applicable to any field of study. And so if we look at these gray boxes up here, these are the steps of our model. You're going to start by defining a goal. In this case, base criteria are the initial inputs of data. There's a derivation and a transformation of the data. In this example, you won't be doing much of that. That usually has to do with looking at data and doing an analysis of how the data appears. And so this example up here of elevation If you use the computer, you can determine the slope of that elevation. And we all appreciate slope. If you've ever been hiking, if you've ever been on a bicycle, a steep hill becomes very significant to you. And so slope has to do with how steep something is. And these colors represent the slope based on a mathematical transformation. Okay. Then what the computer will do is it will allow you as the analyst to give weight to these factors. They may not all be of the same importance. For instance, location or distance to water is probably more important than elevation. And these bobcats can be at higher elevations as long as they're close to water. Combining all of our elements, we can get a output here. And the colored polygons are showing you different levels of desirability. You use the scientific method all the time. Whenever you make a decision, whether it's a simple one like what are you going to wear today, to a complex one like where am I going to live or go on vacation, you will use the scientific method, and you use your powers of analyzing information or analyzing data in order to make that decision. So some of the things that might go into what do you wear is what's the weather? Am I going to be going to work after school? Am I likely to run into the cute girl I saw the first week of class? Am I likely to go hang out with my friends and maybe do something outside and something that would require comfortable recreation clothes? Am I walking? Am I driving? For women, that's always an important, how far do I have to walk? Because uncomfortable shoes become a limiting factor if we have a long way to walk. Okay, so all of those things go into your thought process, and the same is true of a GIS. It's all layers and it's data. So here is another example of a geographic area, and we're looking at these different data sets: slope, frost, elevation, aspect, and then land cover. So all different kinds of information that can be put together in a decision-making model process. So the power of mapping. We are in a definitely connected global world. And with globalization, it means that we rely on all other humans and all other processes on this planet more than ever before. With the power of the internet, we're able to do business better and communicate with other cultures, other places, other lands. And one of the great things about mapping is it's a universal language. So much like music and math, it does not rely on a strong vocabulary. You could be a new language learner and you can share maps and really get a good sense of sharing messages. In fact, some of the earliest forms of written communication were maps, and people that did not speak the same dialects from tribes around the world would meet, and they were able to communicate things like weather patterns and where are resources, where are threats, where's the best place to find water, where's the best place to find food. And they could communicate through the power of mapping because it relies on patterns that don't necessarily get tied to vocabulary in our brains. It's also very strong about the science of where, and everything happens somewhere. By using a map, we can look at the science behind that location. Here's an example of a land suitability analysis. And so different factors were put into the computer, and the analyst told the computer, this is what's important in terms of building and maintaining a plantation. So the layers of data are not listed here, but most likely they included elevation, slope, amounts of precipitation, amounts of sunshine, nutrients in the soil, and possibly distance to roadways. You don't want to have this really great plantation that is not accessible by road because it wouldn't make economic sense to grow a lot of things that you can't move. Okay, our final output here is shown in colors. Again, really, really quickly for you to be able to determine through the power of pattern, where would I put a plantation? You look at your legend and you say, I want yellow, possibly red. And it's really easy then to identify that within your study area. Those are the areas that are the most suitable. Here's a more complex example, and it's using 9 criterion. Now, instead of saying that a location is the best based on weighted influence, what you're doing is you're saying which of these locations meet the most of the criterion on my list. This is a very powerful function for complicated projects that involve multiple stakeholders, because in politics, urban planning, city design, and managing human populations, you're always going to have many competing and often conflicting needs. And so sometimes you want to be able to make decisions that are going to do the greater good for the most areas. So here's an example of criterion that looked at family income, crime rates, existing residential zoning, proximity or closeness to emission sites, rates of pediatric asthma, nearness to major roads, and then surface temperature, tree canopy, and impervious surface. So this is looking at a site selection model, and all of these criteria are deemed important. This is not a weighted example. Instead, our output raster, which is what you see in the colors, is showing us which areas meet the most criterion. So the blues are areas that don't meet very many of these list of criterion that are bullet pointed for you here. But the reds and the oranges are going to have the most criterion that are met. It's not saying that crime rate is more important than the tree canopy. It's saying that the areas of red and orange meet the most of the criterion. This is really important in initial planning stages when you really want to eliminate of an entire geographical area. Let's drill down and let's focus on where is important. Okay, I'm going to step you through a simplified example of the scientific method. So here's our statement of problem. You're tasked with finding the best location or siting for a new school. Very common. These are the criterion that you have been told are important. You need to have a suitable land type. You don't want to build your school on a steep mountainside. You also probably don't want to build your school near a public city dump or toxic site. What are the locations with relatively flat land? Again, it's easier to build on flat land than it is to build on steep slopes. Are the locations close enough to recreation sites? This has been deemed important by the stakeholders who are interested in building this school. They want to have it close to recreation sites. It might be a Waldorf school, it might be an outdoor school, and so they want to be close to those sites. And then are they far enough away from existing schools? This makes good sense because you might have a really great location. It's right next to a big outdoor park and the land is very flat and it's a suitable kind of land, but if there's a lot of schools in that area, you may not have a great need. Okay, here's what the data looks like that was put into this model. We have land use up here, which is looking at what is the land type. I know this legend is impossibly small for you to see, but the different colors represent brush or water, barren land, agriculture, forest, or wetlands. And then this over here, which is the same geographic area, ranks those land types according to what's the most suitable. Here we have a distance from existing schools. And so you can see that the further away something is from an existing school, the more it turns green. The ones that are closer are shown in red. Here we have our slope. We talked about that, how steep something is. And then down here, we have the relative distance to recreation sites. And so when we look at this information quantitatively instead of qualitatively, like we did with a map layer, now quantitative is looking at the numbers. And what we want to do is we want to take those 4 areas and we want to assign a percent influence. I'm going to give you documentation for you to read more about percent influence in a simplified way. It is a assigning of how important something is. So if something has a positive percent influence, it means that there's a positive correlation. More of something creates more of something else. So it's a positive correlation. A negative correlation would be more of something creates less of something else. And an example of a positive correlation, the more sunshine in an area, the higher the rate of skin cancer. Okay, so that would be a positive correlation. And so if you were looking at a project to help reduce skin cancer, you'd want to look for more areas of sunshine. A negative influence might be higher crime rates, mean less suitability for a retail street-facing business. And so that makes sense. You don't want to put a floral shop in an area that has a lot of crime because people won't want to come to that area. Okay, so back to our school model. For this particular project, these were the percent influences that were determined for our variables. And so when those are all put in to our model, what we do is we get a raster that is showing us these green areas are the best. They are the highest ranking value. Yellows are intermediate, and then reds are undesirable. So we would not want to put a school in anywhere that is going to rank this low on our model. Yellow, maybe. It depends on, with that model, it can depend on other factors. And then the green is probably our best choice in this simplified example. Okay, so we went through the scientific method. We had a problem, and then we defined our goal. So the problem is where to put the school. The goal was, let's put it somewhere based on our criterion that we selected. Let's find the data, and then we ran the analysis and we chose a site. So here are those layers again, and you can see, again, complex world. You as a mapping analyst, you decide what data is important. You decide what to put into your map. This is an incredibly complex map. You would not use all of these layers in one project, not likely, but they're all available to you, and you can pick out what's important to you. In a large-scale project, like if you were working for the city of San Marcos, you might have a project that would have this many layers. You in this class will not. But depending upon your goals and objectives, you can select the layers that are going to answer your questions. And so your layers can represent possible sites for new retail stores or offices. I'm sorry, not the layers. That your goals or objectives might be, where is a possible site? Where is a potential location for a service? Where would I put new commercial or residential real estate development? Where might I consider to put a polling place for an election? Where could I put that pop-up business? Where would I put my floral shop? And maybe promotions and events. Where is the best place in the city to host a 10K or an outdoor music festival? And then optimal spots for community outreach and services. So this is very popular with looking at healthcare clinics, looking at mitigating different types of crime, homelessness, drug abuse, maybe prostitution, and different kinds of things that are important to the community. I'm working on a project right now at San Marcos on reducing incidences of hate crime. And so we're using maps to look at where are these incidences occurring, and then we're going to look at what might be the possible correlations. Is this where students gather and maybe drink alcohol? Is this where students recreate or socialize a lot? Is this where students live? Is this happening in the teaching areas of the campus? And so by looking at the power of geospatial information, we're going to say, okay, when we come up with a plan for mitigating hate crimes, which is going to include maybe murals, walls, posters, flyers, and then student gatherings, where on campus are we going to hold these things? Okay, the science of where. So here's an example of a problem with a geospatial component of looking at a 10-minute drive time around a buffer. So this particular project wanted to look at 16 potential sites for an office. And one of the criterion that was important is that it needed to have a 10-minute drive time for potential customers to be able to reach this office. And so everywhere here that you see a white circle with a blue flag in it is a desirable location. So think back to those colored polygons that showed you, okay, these areas have been deemed as desirable. They're affordable, they're in the right neighborhoods, they have access to roads, etc. And so now what we want to do is we want to look at maybe the people aspect. And so we're looking at drive times. We can also set the weight, which is also what we looked at in our table before as influence, and saying some of these factors are more important than others. So the count of potential customers is going to get 50% of our weight because it's really the most important factor. And then count of existing competitors is our next important factor. That makes sense. You want to have a business where you have a lot of potential customers and not a lot of potential competition. And then we also want to look at household counts and then auto service sales. And so those are combined with also distance to nearest competitor, and they're put into the model of where to put our new office. Our output says, well, of these areas, the highest percentage is here, shown by this red polygon. At 51.48%, it's our current best bet to locate our car rental office. The other colors show you areas that might be desirable, and they have a lower ranking. So in conclusion, we looked at sites that were ideal and met criterion. We looked at where are our existing competitors. That's shown here by a dot on the map with a yellow car in it. We looked at potential customers, which customers in business generally come with a dollar sign attached to them, and these icons certainly represent that. We had a 10-minute drive time, which is the boundaries of these polygons as determined by the computer. And then our final score is our site suitability, and you're going to be doing site suitability. Here's our ranking. You can look at that data in detail at another time. What questions do we have so far?
Any question that you have? Wow, Michelle, this was really wonderful. I make sure that I use this recording for my Friday one, because this was indeed a very comprehensive view of the analysis for the business analysis.
Okay,
they're going to go over that for the project. They're going to work through another project, of course, they had all that. But thank you so much. If you have questions, maybe before Michelle, do we still have a little bit more to that, or?
Absolutely. So now we've gone over some very general concepts and examples, and I want to use an example that's going to be applicable for this class in particular. Do we still have time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So now I want to talk about business analyst. So business analyst is a particular, application, and it's an extension of the GIS software that you can use in order to run models, and everything is set up for you, so you don't have to create any of the code. You don't even really have to do much of the map preparation. It's all automated for you. And so with your site selection, you can find a location, and that's represented here by this mark on the map. You can select your geography, so you might be interested in an analysis of particular zip codes. You might be interested in the boundaries of CSUSM. You can also draw a polygon. You may have a particular area that you're interested in representing, and so you can actually draw that on the maps. You're going to define areas, and then you're going to be able to make a competitive analysis report. And so here we can see that this is the suitability analysis. Okay, so let me back up a little bit here, and that was kind of an overview of where we're going. Let me slow down a little bit and give you a little bit more information, and then I'm going to point you to a lot more information. So for the sake of time, I want you to see that these are the main ways you can bring in data. There is data that exists in Business Analyst, and it is in the form of web maps and layers. You can import your own data. You can also custom data setup. This is an advanced functionality. I would say you wouldn't do that until you have a couple of years experience. But for this class, you're going to be selecting from available data sets. Here are some examples: population, median household income, median age, average household size, daytime population, and annual population growth rate. So those are available to you in Business Analyst. You have the power to make maps. You can do color-coded maps where we saw the colored polygons, and you can also do multiple variable maps, which are looking at more than one criterion. If you think back to that suitability layer that we looked at in Beijing, China, it was one color that represented two different data variable inputs. Okay. And so, okay, when you go to share your results, you can create infographics. And so this is an example of an infographic, and it is giving you a geospatial component here. And then the data and all of the information has been organized in a highly visual way for you. You can also share out your results in just a PDF map or an image. You can use a web map. You can use dashboards. The most popular dashboard in the world for the last 2 years has been the coronavirus dashboard, and I can show you that just for interest when we finish up the recording, and just because it's really cool, I'll show it to you. And then ArcGIS story maps. Those are all different ways that you can communicate your results. So again, you can make a map, which is just going to show your data. You can do a summary report. Sometimes that's useful. And then here is an infographic that I know you can't read the details of this infographic, but it is an organized way of combining visual icons and quantitative data. So we've got the qualitative of the images and the qualitative of the maps with the quantitative report of the results of your data. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to